Now it's time we move ahead for our next topic. And we have Dr. Suma Ganesh here. Dr. Suma Ganesh, I welcome you for this virtual conference. Dr. Suma Ganesh is going to chair this session. I would also like to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Rohit Saxena, Dr. Shreya Shah, and Dr. Akshay. Do we have you here? Yes, Dr. Akshay, Dr. Shreya. Welcome, sir. Welcome, madam.
Welcome.
We have our chairpersons here for the next session, and we are right on time. So I request we'll begin the session on time, and I would request our chairpersons to please invite our first speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was just seeing the program. I'm so sorry. I think welcome to our course on white spot in. No, sorry, it is. I see a child with crooked eyes. What to do? So the first speaker is measuring strabismus by Dr. Arun Samprati. I think I would welcome him to the podium and ask him to.
Hello. Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, Dr. Arun.
Yes.
Yes. Please share screen.
Yeah, Dr. Arun, also we request if you can turn on your video.
Yeah, I'm trying, sir. I think there is some problem with the webcam. It's not working.
Not a problem, but you are loud and
clear. I think now it's there.
Good to see you, Dr. Arun.
Thank you, sir.
Share your screen with us, please.
Yeah.
Doctor, we have 6 minutes of time for your presentation. Just 1 minute before it's going to get over, we'll have a buzzer.
Yes, sir.
All right. So could you please go full screen, your presentation?
Yes. So just 1 minute, sir.
Sure, sir.
So is it visible?
Yes, fantastic, doctor. You're good to go.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the Scientific Committee AOS for giving me this opportunity to be here today in this wonderful first ever virtual conference. My topic is measuring deviation. So first of all, we'll see why should we measure the deviation at all. Most important reason is one is for the surgical management. We need to know exact angle of the strabismus for us to plan the surgery. And second is the follow-ups. Look, whenever you're following up a patient, you need to know whether the squint is increasing or decreasing. So that's the important reason. So what is the unit for measuring the strabismus? We are measuring it in two things. One is the degrees and the prisms. 1 degree is approximately equal to 2.5 prism diopters, but then it can change as the angle increases. Suppose it's a 45-degree strabismus, then 1 degree may be equal to 5 prism diopters also. So that's why it's not very accurate. That's why we rely more on the prisms to measure the deviation. So this is more accurate, and we can either use this prism bar, or you can use the loose prisms for measuring the deviation. And also you will need some occluders. And I would like to highlight this important thing which is necessary for measuring the strabismus. That's the accommodative target. So you see a patient here, the eyes are absolutely straight when you see with the torchlight. And the moment you put an accommodative target, you see how much of deviation will be there. So without an accommodation target, if you measure, definitely you'll end up with a false readings. So general rules for using the prism is like whenever we're using the plastic prisms, which we use most of the time, the prisms are placed in front of the deviating eye in the frontal plane, and the apex should be pointing towards the deviation. So what does that mean? Means in an esotropia, the apex should be pointing inwards and the base is outside. So in an exotropia, it is base in a hyper, it is base out, and the hypo, it is base up. So just remember, the apex should be pointing towards the deviation when you're doing the prism bar cover test. Another important thing to remember is when the patient is having a head tilt and when you're trying to measure the angle, it's always important to keep the prisms parallel to the face. Otherwise, you'll end up again with the wrong readings. The test to measure the deviation can be either subjective or objective. Mostly we use this objective methods. Objective, either the light reflex test with the Hirschberg and the Primsky. The prisms, we use the PBCT, and you also can use a synaptophore to measure the deviation. Coming to the first one, the Hirschberg test. So the Hirschberg test estimates the deviation by using the corneal right reflex test. That's the first Purkinje image. So here the examiner will be sitting right behind the light source and seeing directly onto the cornea. So again, this requires a central fixation. Disadvantage of this is like small deviations sometimes may be overlooked and forias are not measured and deviation may be underestimated. So what you do, how to measure the angle in a Hirschberg test? So if right in the center, the angle is 0 or eyes are orthotropic. If the light reflex is falling at the pupillary edge, then we tell it is a 15-degree squint. If it is falling between the pupil and the limbus, it's about 28 to 30 degrees. And if it is at the limbus, it's about 45 degrees. So this is how you measure the angle of strabismus. And this can be improved by using the modified Krimsky test, because here we use the prisms instead of relying on the degrees, as I told. It's easier to do it with the prisms. So here, in the original Krimsky test, which was described, the prism was placed in front of the deviating eye. Whereas in these patients, the fixation may be very poor. So you may not get a very good measurements when you are doing that. So that's why we modified it into a modified Krimsky test, where the prism is placed in front of the fixing eye. So here you'll get a more accurate assessment of the angle of the deviation. So you just place a prism and see that the center, the light reflex in the squinting eye is centered to the center. So this gives us the angle of deviation. So this is used in patients who have poor vision and poor fixation, where a prism bar cover test may not be possible. So this is a small video showing the modified Krimsky test. So you just put a light and then slowly increase the amount of prisms until you neutralize the deviation. And in fact, you can go a little more also to go for suppose you are doing an exotropia, you take the patient to ESO by increasing the prisms and then again get back to the correct angle. So here you can see it becomes ESO and then you get the correct angle of deviation. There's another test, same this thing. I think I'll skip that one. So again, the angle, the prism strength is gradually increased, so that you watch the right reflex on the squinting eye, so that it should be in the center. So this is the Krimsky test. The next is the alternate cover test. So in this, first we dissociate the two eyes so that you can measure the total deviation, the manifest as well as the latent deviation. So we can just go through the prerequisites for this alternate prism bar cover test is that it requires a foveal fixation in each eye and good vision. So if the patient is having a poor vision, then this cannot be done. And also it requires the attention and cooperation of the patient. So it cannot be done in very small children who will not cooperate for that. So how do we go about doing this one? So just first, as I told you, first dissociate the two eyes so that you just do an alternate cover test. So this will bring out the latent deviation. And then you place the prism with the apex towards the deviation, and then gradually increase the strength of the prism till you can neutralize the deviation. So you can see that the deviation is neutralized. So again, here also you can go slightly increase the amount of prism to go for the opposite. Let's go to ESO, and then again come back so that you'll get the accurate measurement of the deviation. This is another, sorry. Okay, so basically measurement of the strabismus is done either with the Krimsky or the alternate prism bar cover test, and the PBCT is always a more accurate measure of deviation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Arun. May I request our chairpersons to please invite our next speaker?
Rohit is there. Okay. The next speaker, I think that was a very nice presentation, Dr. Arun.
Thank you.
Very nicely points covered. I think we can leave it for discussion at the end of the session.
Sure.
So the next speaker is is Dr. Jay Kelkar around?
No.
No, Jay Kelkar?
Yeah, we do not have Dr. Jay Kelkar as of now with us.
Okay, then next is
We can call Dr. Shubhangi.
Okay. Oh, Shreya, hi.
Oh,
And
hi.
Dr. Subhash
good
is
evening.
there.
We have
Dr.
Professor.
Bhangi is also not
Subhash
there.
is there.
We have Professor Subhash here.
We have Professor Subhash here. We can call him.
So I would invite Professor Subhash Dedea to speak on planning a squint surgery. Dr. Dedea, have you uploaded?
Nobody's there in 2 to 3 sessions. Everybody has gone to eat.
You'll have to just switch off your video and eat.
Yeah, they should do that.
Are my slides visible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Dr. Subhash. Please go ahead.
At the outset, I would like to thank the scientific committee for inviting me, and greetings to all the Strabismus family. So basically, for planning the strabismus surgery, anatomy and actions of extraocular muscles and relative contribution of each muscle is very important, and we must know what are the primary actions, secondary actions, and tertiary action, and what is the distance of each rectus muscle from the limbus. And this is the table which shows the approximate length of the muscle, anatomical insertion, tendon length, arc of contact, and actions from the primary position. So basically, why are we operating the patient in planning the surgery? It is very important. It is for binocular singular vision, or to eliminate diplopia, or to correct ASP, or it is purely for cosmesis. So basically, this presentation is an appetizer. And monocular R&R, if you do excessively, then there is chance of incompetence in fusing patients. And however, this monocular surgery is procedure of choice for cosmesis. We must specifically diagnose the etiology, and tailored approach should be there for each and every case. Proper history is very important, and preoperative assessment is very important. We must rule out amblyopia, because if the patient we are operating on the amblyopic eye or on the other eye, that affects the management. Visual acuity, proper measurement, and proper cycloplegic refraction is mandatory. We have to do the other examination also, external inspection of the eyes. And part of the strabismus assessment includes motor ocular motility examination. Must look for any eccentric fixation. And method of measurement has already been stressed by Dr. Arun Sampruti. We must do the AC by A ratio near point of convergence, and we must assess the sensory status. FDT and FGT should be done. Pharmacological investigation should be done if we are suspecting myasthenia. Radiological investigation should be done. So aim of our treatment is to restore good vision to each eye, good binocular single vision, to eliminate diplopia, to eliminate abnormal head posture, improvement of the psychosocial functions, and improvement of the vocational status, and to achieve the cosmesis. And goals should be prioritized based on the etiology, and measurement of the deviation must be reliable and consistent. Desirable is we want to achieve perfect alignment in all gazes. However, the acceptable is ocular alignment in primary and down gaze. And we have to take care expectations of the patients versus expected surgical outcome, and what is the purpose of surgery and what it involves must be explained to the patients, and what are the benefit and risk of the surgery. Timings of the surgery is very important. For constant strabismus, you should operate as soon as possible. For intermittent strabismus, it should be the last option, and in older children and adults, it is at any time convenience of the surgeon and the parents. And for paralytic squints, usually you should wait for 3 to 6 months. Then there are surgeon's factors, degree of squint. Same amount of muscle surgery may give different results in smaller or larger deviations. Age of the patient and duration of the squint has an effect. Recession is more effective as compared to the resection. if there is presence of intractable amblyopia that affects the management, eccentric fixation affects the management, effect of medial rectus is more as compared to the lateral rectus, effect of vertical muscles is more as compared to the horizontal recessions, and combined resect has additional additive effect. General considerations is optimal head position should be there. The neck should be extended. Then we have to think about whether we are going for limbal incisions, phonics incision, or minimally invasive strabismus surgery. To avoid the perforation, we can plan the hangback surgery, and we can avoid suturing in the area with where sclera is thinnest, and we have to ensure that whole of the rectus muscle comes into the muscle hook, so we have to keep it perpendicular to the sclera and complete hooking of the muscle. We can do the pole test, and we have to secure full thickness muscles by central and locking peripheral bites, and we have to respect the posterior Tenon's capsule. Recession and resection are transposition that depends on the need. Anesthesia, usually general anesthesia for children, local anesthesia for adults, and topical anesthesia can be used for cooperative patients and for horizontal surgeries. The comfort and cosmesis of patient by less scarring is preferred modality for initial incisions, and we can assess multiple muscles. Then we have to respect the safe limits for resection. 8 mm resection for the lateral rectus and 6 mm for the medial rectus are the safe limits, and for recession 6.5 for medial rectus and 9 mm for the lateral rectus. Then in the incisions, this minimally invasive strabismus surgery, it is better accepted these days due to osmosis and minimal disruption of the tissues, and there is less trauma to the operative area. And if you want the deviation is approximately 25 prism diopters, then surgery on single muscle may suffice. These are the rough guidelines. For 50 prism diopters, you have to do surgery on 2 muscles, and for 75, 3 muscles, and more than 75, you have to do surgery for 4 muscles. But we should not operate on 3 recti muscles at one time in one eye to avoid anterior segment ischemia, or we should go for vessel sparing surgeries. Then monocular surgery versus binocular surgery, and if we do additional conjunctival recession, that has additive effects. For resurgery patients, we have to prefer unoperated eye, and if there is excessive restrictions, reoperation on the same eye is more useful. We can go for use of antimetabolites, and AS-OCT and dynamic MRI. They are this AS-OCT is non-invasive and can detect the exact muscle insertion, and they are helpful in planning in patients of resurgery. In many cases, surgery is the only treatment, and mainly recession, resection, or transposition, and transposition is usually for the paralytic strabismus. If GA is to be used, suction line choline should not be used as a depolarizing agent. And for reducing the operative bleeding, you can go for slight head-up position of the patient and avoidance of excessive carbon dioxide by levels of hyperventilation. And during surgery, we must avoid damaging the muscle sheath and anterior ciliary vessels. Sheath ligaments and muscle sheath should be disturbed minimally. Be careful about superior rectus and lateral rectus while isolating superior oblique and inferior oblique. And recession should be done fast. And for larger recessions, hangback technique can be used, and ensure adequate attachment of the muscles. Then we can go for surgical modifications like hangback recessions, adjustable sutures, or Fardon's operation. Then some cases like for infantile esotropia, we should have alignment before 1 year of age, and early surgery, that is between 6 months to 1 year, should be done. Bilateral MR recession is treatment of choice in cases without amblyopia, but RRR in cases if there is amblyopia. Intermittent exotropia basically is controversial topic, and surgery we must do the prior patch test, 3 diopter test, and we must see whether there is any lateral incompetence, whether presence. So treatment of intermittent exotropia surgery is only treatment of choice, and bilateral lateral rectus recession are is the treatment of choice. Whether you do recess procedure or bilateral recession, the results are equivocal. There are controversial points. Then vertical commutant deviations can be caused in 3 different ways: overaction of the vertical recti, dysfunction of the horizontal recti. Those are obliques of the overaction of the obliques, and they have different plans. Presence of AV pattern is there that must be treated, and this Parkes 3-step test is very important. And we have to differentiate between congenital and acquired palsies. Then we have to differentiate between unilateral and bilateral palsies, because the treatment is different. And basically, I would like to conclude strabismus surgery result can be improved by careful planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, doctor. You were well in time. Now, may I request our
Thank you
chairperson?
for being perfectly in time, sir.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Perfect time. So, may I request our chairperson to please invite our next speaker, please?
Thank you, Dr. Subhash. That was an excellent presentation. We'll just go on to the next presenter, Dr. Shubhangi Bhave, an outstanding surgeon, done a fair amount of live surgeries also. It shows the remarkable confidence she has in her surgical expertise. So she'll be giving us pearls for strabismus surgery. Dr. Shubhangi, please.
Thank you, Dr. Rohit, for those kind words. I'm afraid there's going to be some overlap between my talk and Dr. Dade's talk, because the topics were such that can't be helped. But I'll try to be as brief as possible. I'm talking to you all about pearls in strabismus surgery. So pearls, while planning surgery, there should be no shortcut to preoperative assessment. So preoperative assessment is the crux of your surgical success. There's no shortcut. You can't just see a patient a day and operate him the same day. It's never done. So you have to see the patient once, twice, thrice before you are sure that the angle is the same, the movements are what you feel they are, and then assessment should be that perfect day assessment should be. The larger deviation would give more correction per millimeter of surgery than a small angle deviation, and although the same deviation would have the same surgery would have more effective in children than in adults. Then patients with fusion potential can be slightly overcorrected, and patients with fusion potential should be undercorrected. Surgery should always be aimed at static angle of the squint and not at a dynamic angle, because whenever there's an partially accommodative esotropia, the static angle would be a particular angle, and if you see them without spectacle correction or see them with less of spectacle correction, the dynamic angle is going to be more. And so if you operate at a dynamic angle, you're going to land up with a exotropia. Then appropriate non-surgical techniques like proper refraction, orthoptic exercises, management of amblyopia, which could eliminate the need for surgery, should be carried out before deciding upon surgery. Now, this girl appears to have a esotropia, which increases when she focuses on a particular object. And after giving glasses, her esotropia is less for distance. And again, there is some esotropia by focal glass. So should be processed before we decide for surgery. The most important thing is counseling of parents. you should be on the same page with the parents, or if the patient is adult, with the patient. We all know that most of the times we need to do a bilateral surgery, but sometimes the patient feels that only my one eye is squinting, and why is that the doctor operated both my eyes? So all this should patient have a happy and happy patient and an understanding patient, and to avoid the litigations and all those things. So counseling is of utmost importance. You have to tell them the length of treatment in a squint. Most of the parents feel that if surgery is done, everything is all right. But I always tell them that surgery is only part of the surgical planning. It is not the treatment as such. So one has to make the patients aware, because they are totally unaware about what the problem is and how is the length of treatment. So counseling, if you spend more time with the children, with the patients, parents, and the patients before surgery, the lesser headache it would be for us afterwards. The PEARLS 7 is when we are doing surgery. So forced junction test is very important. Forced junction should be done at all the stages of the surgery. Before we start the surgery, after we do conjunctiva is cut, after the muscle is cut, after the suturing is done. So forced junction test is very important. I would just like to give a small example of this child who had presented with exotropia with prominent eyes and loss of adduction, and there was a retraction of the lids on adduction. So one felt that it had a tight lateral rectus, and accordingly the surgery was planned. But on doing the forced junction test, on the surgical table, the forced junction was quite free, and so we explored the medial rectus, why it was so, and we found that the medial rectus was hypoplastic. So the reason for loss of adduction in this patient was not a tight lateral rectus, but it was a hypoplastic medial rectus. So the management totally changes. So one has to do forced junction test at all the stages. So the resection of a muscle is more effective when done simultaneously than when done at different times, as has been stated by Dr. Dade. While reinserting the muscle, the width should be maintained. It is absolutely mandatory, because central sagging would mitigate the result of your planning. Anti-segment ischemia is possibility when we are operating 3 recti, especially if one of them is LR. So you have to do a staged surgery or muscle sparing. One has to respect tenons. It would lead to post-op adhesions, especially when we are operating 8 to 10 millimeters behind the muscle insertion. Again, sclera is thinnest at the muscle insertion, and one has to be very careful while taking the sutures while doing the resection procedures. While working on the oblique or vertical muscle, one has to be careful of vortex veins and nerve to the inferior oblique. Again, infant eye has different dimension as compared to the adult eye, and posterior segment is underdeveloped. So surgery, if you go beyond the arc of contact, is unpredictable, and one has to keep this fact in mind while operating. Surgical plan should be based on the patient's record, and the eye should be clearly mentioned. Then when we are doing resurgery, one should get more, try to get as much of history as possible, because in our country, in our place, the patient just walks in without any discharge card, and there's nothing, no record with the patient. One has to look for scars on the conjunctiva, and whenever possible, use an adjustable suture. I'll just tell about one case before I close. In this case, the 30-year-old female had come with a large angle exotropia with history of surgery being done twice, first on both the eyes and second on right eye, but no records. Examination showed scars over the medial recti on both the eyes and right lateral rectus. So Accordingly, one had to guess that the medial recti of both the eyes were recessed. Of course, now we have modalities to image the muscle, which will tell you the location of the muscle, but sometimes it's not possible. And so in this case, we found that the medial rectus was attached about 11 millimeters, which could be brought and we could, yes. So these are the pictures, and thanks for a patient listen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shubhangi. I request our chairpersons to please invite the next speaker.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Shubhangi. Dr. Jay has joined. Dr. Jay Kelkar? No?
No, madam, we are not able to search Dr. Kelkar Jay.
Let's move on to next speaker, Dr. Varsha Pandey. Why some patients are unhappy after surgery?
Yes, hello. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, at the outset, I would like to thank the Scientific Committee IOS for giving the opportunity. Yeah, I'll share this. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes. After hearing the After hearing the important tips from Dr. Dadea and Dr. Shubhangi about the surgical management, after doing everything best, still some patients are unhappy. So what are the causes, or I'd like to discuss few points. The aim of squint surgery is to straighten the eyes by strengthening or weakening the eye muscles, and the indications for surgery are to improve the eye alignment and of course appearance, to correct double vision whenever possible, and to achieve binocular vision if it is there initially. And but all these things are not possible to achieve in all the cases, even after doing the best. So successful squint surgery definitely improves patients' appearance and quality of life. But post-operative expected recovery may be delayed or may not be seen in few patients after doing the best, and that makes the patient unhappy if these possibilities are not informed or explained prior to surgery. Why some patients are unhappy after squint surgery? Either because there are some post-operative complications. Definitely all these complications, most of the complications are avoidable and usually treatable. If there are unrealistic expectations post-surgery, and these are also can be avoided if proper counseling is done before surgery, and risk involved in squint surgery must be explained to the patient before surgery. So discussing the few cases where the squint surgery which can make patient unhappy. In cases of large angle squints, usually these patients require two sittings. And even if we do 3 muscles in one sitting, use adjustable sutures, still some patients are not, they don't get the expected results. And so these cases, sometimes during the period of waiting are unhappy. Like in this case of large exotropia, after 2 sittings, she is happy, but for that proper counseling was essential. Then the lower cases, the right hand side girl is showing the slight lid retraction, lower lid retraction. So in cases of vertical muscle surgery, one has to be very careful. Not only alignment of the eyes is important, but at the same time we have to look, we have to keep the cosmetic appearance of the patients must be kept in mind, so that the superior and inferior rectus muscle surgeries many times give lid retractions and cosmetically bad eyes, even if the eyes are aligned. Then sometimes the recurrence of squint is also to be discussed with the patients. Like this patient, she had large exotropia, sensory exotropia with poor vision in the right eye. So cosmetically, though she is now having better alignment after surgery, but definitely we have to give this information to the patient and relatives that this may recur, though only 25% cases recur. But this is an important, again, information to be passed to the patients. Otherwise, they can become unhappy later on. Then the some cases of diplopia, post-op diplopia is many times seen in cases of long-standing squints, and it usually gets normal as soon as the eyes adjust to see binocularly. Sometimes intractable diplopia may persist rarely, but whenever it is expected, it should be discussed with the patients. These are the few cases of DRS where we can have retraction of the lid or the abnormal palpebral fissures, upshoots. So surgery cannot correct all these signs and needs lot of counseling before the surgery in such cases. This patient, like the case of exo-DRS, the primary position exotropia is improved, her head posture is improved, but still the abduction is restricted, and that needs to be emphasized before surgery in operating the cases of DRS. So the immediate post-operative period, we can have redness, itching, swelling, narrow palpebral fissures for 2 to 3 weeks. So careful dissection at the time of surgery, minimum tissue handling, judicious use of cautery is essential to reduce these symptoms, and we can definitely reduce these symptoms. But it has to be explained to the patient that this is going to be there for another 3 weeks or 1 month. And if it persists, then we can give steroids and antibiotics. But that 1 month period, sometimes these patients are not very, and in some cases, like the extreme case, even after a long 6 or 8 months, slight congestion at the extremes or periphery in the lateral angles, that is also sometimes the patients are not happy even if everything was nice. So such patients, even if everything alignment is okay, we have to deal them in a different way. Then visible scars, conjunctival cyst, granulomas, prolapsed tenons may disturb patient irrespective of parallel eyes. So in this case also the large exotropia is corrected, but there is a small granuloma at the nasal, at the site of medial rectus. And so proper assurance that these are treatable and correctable conditions, and that explanation will reduce the patient's anxiety. Then a few serious complications can occur, which are again making the patient unhappy, like scleral perforation, which is definitely avoidable during surgery. And even if it is there, or then it should be noticed immediately, or if it is noticed after surgery, prompt action, detailed retinal evaluation, and laser if required is done, and then the patient's anxiety can be reduced. Slipped muscle after or during the operation can cause serious problem, causing iso or exo, leading to flawed eye movements, but definitely it is treatable. So all these serious complications are rare, but if it is diagnosed and treated promptly, we can reduce patient's unhappiness. Then eye to be operated must be clear to the patients. Alternating and unilateral squints concept should be properly explained. Like in this case, also freely alternating. So patients are almost also not sure which eye is to be defective. And then these cases, they may feel that the wrong eye was operated. And another important point to be emphasized is the squint surgery won't improve any defective vision in the eye after surgery. And that must be explained to the patients. There is an interesting study, shared decision making and patient satisfaction with strabismus care, a pilot study done in 2021. So it is a communication process with the provider sharing all the relevant treatment alternatives, benefits, and risk of each patient procedure to the patient, and patient also shares his preferences regarding choices. Thus it is a bi-directional process, just beyond the typical informed consents. And there is a questionnaire and which assess the shared SMD score and the patient satisfaction. And this also studies shows that the communication is very important between patient and surgeons, leading to patient satisfaction in the strabismus care. So to conclude, we must discuss following points with patients before surgery, that the surgical results are unpredictable, overcorrection and undercorrections are seen, additional surgery may be required in few cases for the final results. Meticulous dissection during surgery for early recovery from post-op redness and swelling. So that will again reduce patient's anxiety. Unrealistic high expectations make patient unhappy. So that should be very clear. Role of counseling definitely very important to make the patient understand what to expect after surgery. Surgery is very, very rewarding. We can have high number of post-op happy patients if we spend more time with patients before surgery and we take lot of care in assessment, then in the follow-up and during the surgery, meticulous dissection. So these are the references. So we can have a happy patient in cases of squint surgeries. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Varsha. That was a wonderful talk. May I request our chairperson to please invite the next speaker?
Thank you, Dr. Varsha. An excellent presentation. We'll now go on to Dr. Shreya Shah, who will be talking on non-surgical options for strabismus. Again, looking forward to a wonderful presentation as she always makes it. Please, Dr. Shreya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rohit, for a nice word. I'm thankful to the people allowing me to speak on non-surgical management. When we understand non-surgical management, it doesn't understand only strabismus. It has to be understood diplopia, confusion, strabismus, and nystagmus. So our talk will go on 4 Ws: which, what, where, and when. So we must understand which kind of the strabismus it is and at what stage the strabismus it is. According to that only we can treat ranging from asynoptic symptom to the manifestropia. And we have a long list of strabismus workup which is already discussed by previous speakers, including fusional amplitude and reserve and accommodation amplitude also. Let's see when, where, when to intervene, where to intervene, and what to do to intervene. For that, we must have option what are the available to intervene. Refractive correction, bifocal over minus monovision is the choice of treatment. Second, orthoptic exercise vision therapy. For convergence insufficiency, fusional training, antisuppressant training, smagnocellular stimulation, prisms also incorporation in glasses or Fresnel prism. Occlusion and fogging can work. Medical therapy can be miotics or cycloplegics, pilocarpine and cholinesterase inhibitors nowadays not used because of the side effects. We may use levodopa, carbidopa for treatment of amblyopia. Injections, Botox and bupivacaine, yes. And there are other options: acupuncture, meditation nowadays, education assistance, surgical correction, and the combination of treatment. So now let's see when and where to know where the problem lies. So if the patient has diplopia confusion, the first thing is similar images on the non-corresponding points. So if you look the isotropic eye, the person gets 2 images. One is already through fovea and one is from the isotropic eye. So in this kind of patient, we'll have diplopia present only under the binocular condition. Confusion worse viewing the bright stimulus in a dim light. The second option for under this condition is retinal maculopathy. So here the eye may be aligned, but the cells are misaligned. So if you look carefully, if the light focus on this, it will go normal vision. In this kind of patient, diplopia almost always have vertical or diagonal, and it works in bright lines. So when light falls on the deviated cells, then the confusion starts occurring. So we must understand what is the cause. The second possibility of unfocused light projecting on the second image. So their first option is higher order higher error aberrations. So in this condition, if you put the cover test, if diplopia will not go, but if you put pinhole, the diplopia can be corrected. That is because of irregular astigmatism. The second cause in unfocused light is dry eyes. And again, the same thing will be there because of irregular anterior optical interface. The third possibility can be inability to fuse the images on corresponding points. So this is a very small group of people. The problem lies in the visual pathway, and this kind of patient will, if you ask where is the second image, they will not be able to tell because most of the time it will be floating image. And in this also, second is the problem may lie at the cortical level, paradoxical diplopia. Again, there can be an anomalous binocular correspondence. So we one by one see what to do. If there is a similar strabismus neuromuscular defect, refractive correction will definitely work. Horizontal strabismus correction can be done, and don't forget to add the accommodative components or over minus whatever we want to do. Orthoptic exercise, yes, even in large angle of strabismus with some fusional control, mainly in intermittent, and there should no limitation on the ocular rotations. In Prism in glasses is small to moderate angle tropia, capable of sensory fusion and fairly commutant division. But if it is non-commutant, we can use Fresnel prism. And occlusion fogging will keep if the fusion is not able to achieve. Let's go to the second option. When there is a retinal maculopathy, refractive correction can be done best if no metamorphopsia is there. But then it is to be detected by Amsler grid or spectrum domain OCT. And good spatial localization is there. We can correct with the refractive correction. Maximize the acuity, monovision with the dominant eye for distant and non-dominant for near. Orthoptic exercise will not work here. Prism. Give least amount of prism because most of the people will ask more and more and more, they adapt to it. So try to avoid prism. Fogging and occlusion if other things are not possible. If you look into higher order, again the refractive correction by bifocal, but here always switch from the spectacle to contact lens or refractive surgeries. Prism and orthoptic spheres are not possible. And again, the fogging when needed. Dry eyes, treat the cause. If you look at the visual pathway problem, then isoconic lenses for anisoconia spectacle can be prescribed. Orthoptic will not work here. Prism again may be helpful, but that second image we need to put on the scotoma. So patient may increase strabismus or create one if it is not there. So occlusion also Bengerder's filter and adhesive tap can use. And if it is cortical, optical correction will not work. Orthoptic exercise can relearn the suppression. Prisms contraindicated and fogging can be done with the. So when we do orthoptic exercise with some certain aim and we have criteria to start the orthoptic exercise because it has got the greatest risk of developing intractable diplopia. So we'll just move on, or we will not discuss about the orthoptic exercise that are many available, but we have done, am I audible?
Yes, doctor, you're audible.
Yeah, I'm not.
May I also request you to please come to the.
Yeah, I'll just sum up and I'll just ending.
Thank you so much, doctor.
1 second, I'll just go through. So I just wanted to tell about this magnocellular stimulation. So that is what we have done in few patients recently for 6-7 patients, and we have seen some improvement in vision, but not much of in a strabismus. Still, our prospective study is going on. Botox and bupivacaine is always an option for the treatment. Be aware when you are using bupivacaine because of its side effect and mode of action. It can create orbital inflammation, but it has to be injected with EMG guidance. So sometimes we may have to give postoperative strabismus, and other options are not the scope of this talk. Nystagmus workup can be done properly, and these are the algorithm to use in nystagmus surgeries. Thanks to my patients, thanks to my teachers, thank you.
Thank you so much, doctor. May I now request our chairpersons to please invite the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Shreya. We'll have the next talk. That's by Dr. Magdalene, and she'll be talking on prism therapy.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes, doctor, your screen is visible.
Okay. So good afternoon. My topic is prism therapy for strabismus, which is a non-surgical management of strabismus. Prisms are actually a triangular transparent wedge of refracting material. One prism diopter produces an apparent linear displacement of 1 centimeter of an object situated 1 meter away. And as we all know, the image is displaced to the apex and the light towards the base of the prism. I don't know what has happened. I don't know. Hello?
I think go back and come back.
Okay, I think.
It's gone.
So, yeah, sorry. So basically the prisms, they can be placed in different positions for us to measure. So, but there may be errors in measurement when they are placed in positions which they are not calibrated. Stacking of prisms, vertical and horizontal, are allowed. And if it is going to be both horizontal, then you have to split the prisms between the two eyes. When we place a prism in front of one eye, the eye moves towards the apex of the prism. But when prisms are placed in front of both eyes, the prisms make the eye move in the same direction. The net effect is subtractive. When the prisms make the eye move in the opposite direction, the net effect is additive. Vertical prisms placed in bases opposite to each other, the net effect is additive. Uses of prisms can be for diagnosis of strabismus and for management. There are a battery of tests for diagnosis, but I will be highlighting a few tests. Measurement of the angle of deviation. You can do a prism bar cover test, alternate cover test, Krimsky's test, and for intermittent deviation to measure the primary and the secondary angle of deviation, binocular balancing for getting the proper refractive correction, AC by A ratio, post-op diplopia test to assess whether the patient will have diplopia after surgery, and also cyclovertical deviation using the Maddox rod and the double Maddox rod, 4 prism base-out tests, and other tests which I will not be in a position to mention. And for measuring non-strabismic binocular vision anomalies and confirmation of binocular single vision, measuring the fusional vergence and the accommodative vergence. Now, management using prisms. Prisms are used as relieving prisms optically to reduce the demand to fusional vergence and stabilize the sensory motor fusion. Corrective, you give the exact amount of prism, so residual vergence demand is 0. Inverse, base in the same direction as the deviation to increase the demand to the controlling vergence system, and yoke prism to move both the eyes synergistically away from the primary gaze into different field of gaze to stabilize binocular vision, and OCPs, overcorrective prism, to shift the retinal image beyond the fovea in the opposite hemiretina, basically to make it an ARC and NRC. Rotating is also to make the ARC to NRC, and regional or sector to stabilize binocular single vision in different gaze or at different distances, and slab off or reverse slab off for eliminating the vertical prismatic effect. Whatever it is, the prisms can be used in 2 modes. Either you ground the prism and put it in the glass by decentering or mount it on the glass, or the Fresnel prism, which is a wafer prism series of plastic prisms stacked to give an effect of a large prism to overcome weight. The principle is that the power of a prism depends on the prism angle and not on its thickness. And the performance of a Fresnel prism is much better to a conventional prism. The magnification is small. The spherical error for at any viewing angle is also less, though there might be loss of contrast and decrease in visual acuity when you use a higher prism. So they are very thin, negligible weight, 1 millimeter, and about 40 prism diopters are available, made of polyvinyl chloride, and you can get the orientation by the base, which will be written on the Fresnel prism. The prism is stuck to the smooth surface of the spectacle, applying water after cutting it to the appropriate size. So coming to the conditions where we use the prisms, prisms are used to promote fusion and reduce deviation in symptomatic and decompensated foveas when the fusion is disrupted and the eyes deviate. Prisms are also used in convergence insufficiency as an exercising prism base out to force the system to work harder, and base in can be artificially to align the eyes, and base out prisms for divergence insufficiency. Prisms are also used to eliminate the vertical prismatic effect. You use a slab off prism when it's a high minus and a reverse slab off for a high plus. In mild amblyopia, prisms are also applied as a patch. In small angle strabismus, diplopia, cranial nerve palsies, and intermediate timing before surgery, yoke prisms, 5 to 10 prism diopters, are used to bring the null point to the primary position in nystagmus. And in ankylosing spondylitis, base up yoke prisms can allow for improvement in straight ahead positions. In homonymous hemianopia, to bring the images from an area within the visual field. Very high powers are required and can create some cosmetic problems, but definitely it helps. Prisms are also used for enhancing communication to improve the appearance of a blind eye. Base in for an ESO and base out for an EXO. Last but not the least, prisms are also used in a variety of instruments which we use for strabismus and ophthalmic purpose. Thank you. I'm not able to hear.
No, he's muted, I think. But thank you, Dr. Magdalene. That was a very nice, crisp presentation.
Okay, so may I request our chairpersons to conclude the session? We
Dr.
have some
Dr.
time.
Jay is not still there?
Yeah, Dr. Jay is still not there. but
Okay,
we
fine.
still have some more time, so we can go with some question answers if required.
Any questions in the audience is not there, so I think.
Can I ask one question to Magdalene?
Yes, please.
Have you tried the spectacle decentration to get a prismatic effect?
Yeah, I have
Instead
not.
of adding prisms to the specs, especially if you are wearing high plus or high minus, have you tried the?
No, I have not tried. I have not tried.
That also can give you up to, I think, up to 6 to 8 prism diopters of
No,
correction.
basically we can give prisms up to 8 prism diopters, but usually when I put the prism in a spectacle, I man around about 2.5 to 3 diopters in both the eyes. So it will come to 6 prism diopters.
And also when you decenter, then you have to add the ballast prism. Otherwise, the glass will look that is done by optometrist.
The optician will be able
Yeah,
to.
optician
And it depends upon
on
the power of glass or the power of the lens you are decentering. So if you, unless you have significantly large refractive errors, this decentrations may not, in fact, I would say the reverse is far more important. Every child you prescribe glasses to, check the centration, especially if the child or patient is even remotely unhappy. So a very good, thank you, Dr. Shubhangi, for raising the decentration point. It's one thing that we often overlook, but can be the cause for a certain amount of asthenopia among children with moderate or high refractive errors.
But children can accept up to very high powers, even up to 5 to 6 refractive errors. They are very comfortable. They don't give any complaints.
No, but if it's a progressive
options have to be given to the parents.
When we are giving progressive glasses, the more and more important the centration. Because sometimes nowadays, most of the parents, they're switching from, whenever we give them glasses, a bifocal, they prefer to, switch to progressive. And then I find that when the optical people, they're preparing to give them progress. So we have to really tell them.
So great for aphakic rehabilitation bifocals, but not at all satisfactory for accommodative esotropias.
Exactly, yeah.
So
nowadays, the larger lower segment is not made. They, I don't know, the optical persons make a large D bifocal.
D bifocal.
They don't.
So that D bifocal is used now even. So it's so difficult, especially when the refractive error is more, then also they have a difficulty in giving the executive bifocal. So it is not available only. So these are the actually more practical points in the glasses only in children with the squint. Like we may, even after doing the surgery, we find that the glasses sometimes, especially when even with the pediatric cataract or squint, the glasses are not perfect as we want them to be. So I think that's
Rohit, one thing I would like to ask, Rohit.
Yeah, sure, ma'am.
If it is an anisometropia, till what level do you go in spectacle difference?
So
highest difference.
So of course, generally we've seen that an anisometropia of about 3.5 diopters would be the about upper limit they would tolerate. But the other important thing is, one, how comfortable they are, and two, if they are weaned off occlusion therapy, whether they are able to, they don't recur, the amblyopia does not recur. So those are key things when you're following up. But as they grow older, of course, if you can possibly manage to convince them about contact lenses, it would of course be a much better option. But 3.5 diopters of anisometropia is probably, I think, beyond which I think it becomes difficult to tolerate.
Yeah, but I think myopes
can tolerate much more.
We
have seen that up to 6 to 8 diopters.
Yeah, they can tolerate much
just
more.
check for stereopsis when you prescribe and give a high power difference in the lenses. Yes. So while unilaterally they may be able to manage, or they may not complain of asthenopia because they are able to ignore the central image of the high refractive errors. Because higher the power of the lens, the more higher order aberrations and more aberrations are there in the system. So it's probably possible that they may be able to occasionally ignore the image, and that's why. So always important in high anisommetropes to check for stereopsis to see how comfortably they are seeing both from both the eyes.
One important point we should impress upon the patients regarding if we have done the surgery, they must use the refractive correction, because sometimes the patient comes, once surgery has been done, that means everything is done. So that point must be.
The glasses also, they
Yeah,
feel
even the amblyopia treatment. Otherwise, they go into consecutive because their fusion has not developed, and then
Yes.
after 1 or 2 years again they become consecutive. So that is very important to maintain the fusion. And there are no questions from the audience, I think so.
All right. So can we conclude this session?
Yes,
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
we can. Yeah.
So I request my our chairpersons if you can conclude the session, please.
Rohit,
Yeah, so thank you to all the speakers who were here, Dr. Suma, Dr. Shreya, and Dr. Akshay, who co-chaired with me, and all the speakers. We had some very interesting discussion, apt for beginners and basics and for some comprehensive understanding. And it was really very nice and enlightening, particularly the tips of surgery that we had the speakers from. So I think thank you very much. And I think that during the course of the next 4 days, we'll be again meeting somewhere virtually. Thank you very much.
And
Thank you so much.
I will also not like to miss the opportunity to thank our chairpersons, Dr. Suma, Dr. Rohit, Dr. Shreya, Dr. Akshay, and of course, all the speakers. I would like to thank them for their time, the virtual time, and a lovely presentation here on this. Thank you so much, doctors.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.